Now there's nothing like the ride of a Lincoln Town Car. Unfortunately, this engine's running rough and the check engine light's on. Today on Tech Garage, we're gonna address those issues so you can keep your car running smooth. Now Brian's waiting at the shop, so let's get this one in. Welcome to Tech Garage presented by Advance Auto Parts. You know, a lot of common problems are associated with either spark or fuel. Today we're going to look at ignition systems and we're also going to look at a fuel system. And we're going to start right here with the Lincoln Town Car.
The famous 4.6 liter Ford motor, John, that's a common one. That thing's used in F-150s, Mustangs, Crown Vics, Lincoln Town Cars. And I think since 1998, the 4.6 and the 5.4 are all candidates for misfires or running rough.
Brian, it really only takes three things for a car to run: spark, fuel, and compression. We'll go ahead and dive into this one and fix it, but you know, later we're also going to look at a Jeep Wrangler and the fuel system.
Let's get this thing fixed. I'm going to start scanning.
But while you do that, come on over here and I'll show you how to run these tests on the trainer. Well, we're ready to run our diagnostic test, our power balance test, right on our trainers. But before we do that, a quick review on ignition systems. Now, we all remember the old contact breaker points. They spin around, and what's happening is the points are actually open and closing that primary circuit, inducing a voltage into the coil, and making that big spark. Now, I grew up mostly with fuel injection, but you know, Brian showed me how to set these points with a dollar bill. From that, we went to a distributor, still a distributor, but it's an electronic distributor. What we have is we have a pickup in here, and this spins around and actually sends a signal to the computer, and then the computer will actually tell it when to spark or not to spark. Still a distributor, but electronic distributor. Then we went to what's called a distributor-less ignition system. Now we have to look at the primary wires right here are the small wires. They're feeding the small voltage up here to an ignition module, and the coils are located right here. The only difference is it's not driven by a crankshaft or a camshaft or even an oil pump. This is going to be remotely accessed. Then what happens, it comes up here to the secondary wires, which are the fat wires. That's going to deliver the spark through our spark plug here. Now this is a great system, but what we need to do is get you back to the garage. We'll go ahead and run these tests right here on the board, and then we'll watch Brian do them. The power balance test. Now that's pretty simple. Our goal here is to take a spark away from a cylinder. If I take a spark away, in essence, we're creating a misfire. So if we're creating a misfire, that engine should shake a bit. If it shakes a bit, it was sparking in the first place. And I can do that here. Now what I have is two sets of adapters. Now this one here, we can put in on the coil pack, or you can just go to your desk drawer and get a paper clip. Works just as good. Just be careful when you're working around this. I'm going to take the paper clip, come up here, and get it into where I can actually tap into the wire of where it's going to spark. This one here, find your coil pack, nice little adapter, put it on the top. Why? Because I want to take a test light and I want the electricity to run and ground out that cylinder. Electricity's lazy. It's going to take the path of least resistance. What does that mean? Well, if I take my test light and I ground it and I touch that, I'm going to take the spark. All the electricity is going to run through the test light to ground. Hence, the spark plug's not going to fire. And I'll show you right here. If I turn this on and I come over and I touch this right here, you can see sparks going away, coming back, going away, and coming back. Come down here, the same thing. If you're on your coil pack, I'm going to touch it. You can see the spark plug right here, gone, comes back. Now that you understand how to run this power balance test, I suspect Brian's digging in deep on that Lincoln. So I'm sure curious to see what he found out, and we'll do that when we return with more Tech Garage.
This edition of Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by MSD, Ignitions, Distributors, Coils, and more. AP Laser, leading the way. Steel Rubber, quality crafted rubber parts and weather stripping. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back to the garage.
Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now, before the break, we told you we were going to scan the system to see if we'd retrieve any codes. We actually got 3, but the code of interest is a P0305. Now, a small thing that means a lot if you're working by yourself, get a code reader that's got a long pigtail like this one, so you can be out here under the hood. Some of the more modern code readers actually have Bluetooth, so you can have your diagnostic screen up on your iPhone or your iPad and make this a little bit easier. The P0305 is going to send me in the general direction of cylinder number 5, but to understand what that really means, hey John, we need an explanation.
That's right, that is a misfire code. Now the actual code P0305, that all means something. The P stands for powertrain, the 0 is a generic code, then the 3 is the actual ignition system, and the 05 is a specific code. That 05 means it's cylinder 5. Now you might ask, how does the car know it's cylinder 5? Well, I can show you right here. I pulled up MotoLogic. Professional techs use this. We get a good look at it right here. You can actually see it's misfire detection. The car is looking at crankshaft revolutions. 200 revolutions, type A code, 1,000 revolutions, type B code. Just computer talk, how it's working, how it's looking at it. But here's what it actually sees. I have a good illustration for you, and this is really neat because what's happening is the actual engine fires. Every time the engine fires, the crank has a pulse. So what's happening, I go 186, 186, and it knows everything's all right. But if example, if I went 1 and there was a slow lag, and then 6, it missed that cylinder. And after it sees that, after a given period of time, it kicks that check engine light. Now that coil on plug system, we have it right over here. We can see exactly what Brian's working on and understand a little bit before we get under the hood. You can see right here, now our coil on plug, same thing as before. We actually have our primary side. Our primary side's coming in, and it's feeding our secondary side of the coil. Just a nice tight package. Everything's real good right here. You got it all going in, sparking right there. Secondary, primary. Come over to the board, fire it up. You can see I have a crank position sensor and a cam position sensor. Now my crank's telling it when to start, and the cam could be telling it sequentially when to fire. Here's a tip for you. A lot of times if a car doesn't start, it's usually the crank. If I unplug that, you see all the spark goes away, it's not going to start. Now on the other hand, I can unplug the cam position sensor and it still fires. It just goes into sometimes multi-bank firing. It knows what to do to get the car running, limp home mode, but it'll get you there. Now what Brian found is actually a coil on 5. Number 5's not firing. You can see we disabled coil 5 on this one. So what he has now, we probably suspects it's not a cam or crank sensor because the rest of them are firing. So if you have one, what we have to do over at the car now is he's got to look at the primary and secondary. We need the input on the primary, and we can do some secondary measurements to isolate what's going on with that system. Brian, how's it coming over there?
Well, John, we're ready to test ignition coil pack number 5. Now, we got a little lucky. It's up here at the front of the engine. We did have to remove the air plenum, but it's easy test to do. Remove the primary clip, pulls right off, and there's one mounting bolt. In this case, it's a 7mm. Work down in here, back it out, and we're going to lift this coil pack up out so we can get a good accurate test with a spark tester. Little tip, remove this bolt. You don't want to drop that down the hole. Ignition coil pack comes up out. I want to reconnect the primary connector so that we're sending an impulse to test this coil. And then a powerful little tool, a spark tester. We're going to create a ground right here. There's a good bracket I can grab hold of. We're going to slide the boot on, and what you should see, if this coil pack was working properly, is spark across this gap. I know that looks like a big gap, but it'll throw the spark there. Now you can hold it at this end and support it, and here's where you need a buddy. Hey Chase, go ahead and crank it over and let's see if this is sparking. We got no spark. You can kill it, thank you. We got no spark jumping that gap. We've got a problem with coil pack number 5. Now, here's what a lot of people do. You run to your local auto parts, you get one ignition coil pack, and you think you're in good shape. But this is a great opportunity to test it with a neighboring coil pack, maybe cylinder number 4. Happen to be lucky and have one of them in my toolbox, so I'm going to rerun the test with the exact same coil pack and see what we get. Primary comes off, primary goes on, listen for the clip, you got a good connection, reinsert it on the tester. Chase, go ahead and try it now. Now that is a spark. Look how far that spark's running. That is a properly performing coil. So, what does all this mean for you? Hey John, I think we got to replace coil pack number 5.
Yeah, well, look what I got for you.
Nice.
Yeah, I went and got a whole set and a couple coils, but ta-da!
Love it. MSD.
Every single one of them. Now, I know you're probably thinking, what do I want to do with 8 coils? One of them's misfiring. Well, logically, maybe it doesn't make sense, but here's the deal. You've got 8 coils on this car. Chain's only as strong as its weakest link. So what happens is you replace a coil, it's got 90,000 miles on it. It's just a matter of time. The other coils are going to start to fail. And as they fail, you're going to come back and think it's that coil. It's probably not. After 8 times, you're going to wish you would have got the whole set. Now, a couple other tests you could make. Maybe you don't have access to the coil like Brian had, the other coil. So you can pull that coil out, which is the bad coil, and you can take the meter. You got a DVOM, you can go right in the garage and do this. Take your DVOM. We talked about earlier, the primary and secondary sides. Well, you can come across the secondary side by going to a terminal. Once I get touching that terminal, and I can come down to the bottom here. There we go. All right, it's showing about 5,000 ohms of resistance. Well, that's good for the secondary side, but that doesn't mean the coil is good. We also have to deal with the primary side. So if I come across the primary side on both of the leads, OL, it's out of limits, means it's going in, nothing's coming back out. So we have an issue on the primary. We're going to go ahead and replace it with these MSD coils. These are awesome. Here's the deal with these. If you look at this, it's an exact fit, exact replacement, nothing different. Well, that's where the similarity ends. When you get inside one of these are engineered spec with the materials to give you better performance on the primary and secondary, so you're not going to have any issues with this coil. This car is going to run a long time. Well, we'll get this one buttoned up, but you know, when we come back, we got to address that Jeep with the fuel systems, and we'll do that when we return with more Tech Garage.
This thing's going to run great. Welcome back to Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts. Now, in the last few weeks, we've talked about air, fuel, and fire. Now, you can see on our Jeep with a 4-liter straight 6, we've absolutely upgraded our air intake to an Air Raid cold air intake system. We're flowing more air. We've also replaced the ignition coil packs. This Jeep has over 100,000 miles on it, and they needed freshened up, so we're throwing plenty of fire now in that power equation. Anytime you're out working under the hood of your vehicle, be sure you disconnect the negative battery terminal. It's just a good practice for safety. In this case, since we're working with fuel vapors and the fuel system over here, I'm just going to lay a rag on top of the positive battery terminal to make sure nothing can fall and arc or spark. Now, step 1 is I'll remove the wind tunnel from our new air raid system so we can gain access. Before you get into the fuel rail at all, you want to pull the fuel pump fuse and then start the vehicle and drain that fuel system, pump it all dry so you effectively discharge the system. When you come over to the fuel rail, you can just confirm that you've depressurized by accessing the Schrader valve, capture any residual that may be there with the rag. There shouldn't be much at that point. We'll remove the fuel rail and then we'll replace our injectors one at a time. That's definitely going to create more power. But when you're doing this project, you should understand exactly what it's all about. To help us understand that is John.
Brian, the injectors are an important part of the system, and I have some spray patterns over here I'd like to show you. Now these spray patterns, these are going down into the cylinder. You're looking right here at a perfect spray pattern. That's important because we have to atomize the fuel down there in order for it to burn. These other ones, not so much. Offset, dripping, not going to atomize, not going to give you that volumetric efficiencies we've been talking about in the prior shows. This one right here, good spray pattern. This one's split, not going to do the job, clogged. Now what is an injector? An injector is nothing more than a wire windings through here, a solenoid that magnetically picks up and closes down. When it's up, fuel's delivered. When it's off, it's down, fuel gets stopped. So we can take those windings and we can actually measure them. You can do this yourself. You come over, put your meter on ohms of resistance, and simply just come across the 2 terminals. When you come across the 2 terminals, you're actually measuring that windings that are in there, and this one's showing about 12.4 ohms of resistance. That's about normal, but check the specs for the car you're working on. This one's in good shape. If it wasn't, it may be clogged. So you have to look at your fuel system itself. Now the fuel system itself starts down here with our Airtex fuel pump, drives all the way up through our injectors, and then returns back down to the pump. Now, if you suspected a clog injector, you can run a flow test. I have an actual tester here that's going to run it, simulate the computer, and run the injectors. So what I want to do is I want to come over and watch fuel pressure. We're up with good fuel pressure. We're right in specs there. Then shut the car off, wait a few minutes. It shouldn't bleed down. If it's bleeding down, we got an issue. Now also, I can take this, and we took one of these injectors off an old Oldsmobile. This one was clogged and giving us a problem, so I can go ahead and hit that. And now you watch the fuel gauge. When I go ahead and energize it like the computer, we're gonna watch the drop. Well, that didn't hardly drop at all. That injector's clogged. Well, how do we know? Well, let's go over to another one that's not clogged. I'll go ahead, bring the fuel pressure back up to specifications, close it off, and hit it again. Now that's a big difference, a big difference. So what that tells me is this one's flowing. I'll go around and I'll go through all the injectors. They should all flow real similar to each other. You saw the one that's not flowing, it's clogged. You're gonna have a misfire problem with that cylinder. And that's the issue with our Jeep. It's just got a lot of miles, it's time to freshen them up. We want them all flowing like those good ones, and we'll do that as soon as we return with more Tech Garage.
The average range for fuel pressure in port fuel injection is A, 9 to 13 psi, B, 1 to 3 psi, C, 35 to 45 psi, or D, 1500 to 3000 psi. The correct answer is C. Normal operating pressure for a port fuel injection system is 35 to 45 psi. This edition of Tech Garage, presented by Advance Auto Parts, is being brought to you by Dustless Blasting. It's the future of surface preparation. Cargo Glide, flexible cargo management solutions. MSD, ignitions, distributors, coils, and more. And by Advance Auto Parts. Let's get you back to the garage.
Welcome back to Tech Garage. We're this close to a lot more power in our beastie 4-liter Jeep. Now, I have the fuel rail hardware completely disconnected. Easy to do, just 4 bolts. Also took off some brackets here so we have good visibility and access to replacing these injectors. I've also disconnected each one of the fuel injector wiring harnesses, and I've got them stacked in here kind of orderly so there's no potential for issues on the reinstall. Finally, before we take this off, I checked the Schrader valve here one more time to make sure we had no pressure, no fuel in the line, not even a drip. We did depressure it nicely. Now, if you're going to remove the fuel supply line, which is next, you've got to back down this safety clip. You've got to get a professional fuel line disconnect tool like this. It's cheap, but it means everything as you try to separate these two. It slides down and into that coupling. You work it in, pull the whole thing toward you. You got to be patient here. Work that fuel supply line off, and there you go. And no leakage of that supply line either. Again, evidence that we depressurized this system nicely. Take the tool off, and you can see this fuel pressure rail is moving. I did that gently, and I was very patient. And out comes the fuel rail. And I think I hear John with some nice new injectors here from BWD.
Yeah, I got the whole set. Cha-ching, we're in business.
Awesome.
What we need to do now is just basically pop a clip off and then go ahead and pull the injector out, and then we'll put the new ones in. But a super important tip, these are great injectors. Why? Because they come with the O-ring on the top and the bottom. You can see the O-rings. Some do, some don't. So make sure if they have the O-rings, you may have to find the other ones may not have it.
These are missing them.
And these have it. So
It's
what
gotta
happened
be in
here?
the cylinder head.
Absolutely. We got 3 of them sitting in the cylinder head.
Okay, John, while you're prepping number 1, I'm going to harvest this final O-ring out of the intake manifold to make sure we're ready for the new injectors.
Great. Now all we got to do is take a little lube the O-ring, put it on there. Make sure you use this. Now, these O-rings are really a tight fit, so you may have to just work it in, just gently twist and push and twist and push. It's not so easy, but you got 50 pounds of fuel pressure on the other side of that, so you want to make sure, number 1, you don't pinch it, and number 2, it went in like that all the way in. Now we just take the clip, re-secure it back on there, and we'll go back and we'll do each one of our injectors the same way. Make sure we're clean, make sure you don't double O-ring it. Then what you want to do is just take the fuel rail, reverse the procedure, and put it back on the car just like he took it off. This thing ought to run like a beast.
I'm excited. Take your time, be patient. Anybody can do this if you follow the right procedures. You talk about more power. Who gets to drive this thing first?
Brian, all that's left is one of our favorite segments, the email question of the week.
John, Max from Flagstaff, Arizona emailed us this week. He's got an 08 Malibu that after it sits for a while or overnight, it takes it a long time to start. It's sluggish in the startup process. Any suggestions?
Max, to understand what's going on with your car, we got to look at the fuel system. Now the fuel system starts right here at the pump, and this is the supply line. It brings it up, goes through the rails, gives your injectors the fuel, but then it returns also through a pressure regulator. Now the pressure regulator, it's open at idle and it lets a lot of fuel return back to the tank because we don't need it. But then when we get to wide open throttle, it closes and backs up pressure because we're going to need a little more fuel pressure if you want to go fast. Now, you can take that gauge we took earlier, simply just turn the key on, bring our fuel pressure up. Now, what a lot of people don't know is there's a check ball in the fuel pump that's supposed to hold that pressure when we shut the key off, and our pressure regulator is supposed to close, keeping that pressure in the rail. If your pressure's not in the rail, it's slowly going to drop. Brian, I saw you run a few tests before. Can you help out Max with what you can do?
Sure, I think so. Max, if you have access to your supply line and your return line, a couple tests you can do. Pinch off the supply line. And when you pinch off the supply line, if your pressure stops dropping, then the problem is definitely in the pump, probably that check valve that John mentioned inside the pump, and you'll have to replace the pump. If you can get access to the return line that's coming back into the tank from the fuel rail, pinch off that return line. If your pressure continues to stop dropping, then chances are the problem is the pressure regulator valve.
That's right. Now, if you pinch them both off, Max, and it's still dropping pressure, one of these injectors are leaking. And think about it. If they're leaking down, you don't have the pressure. So when you come out of work or overnight or extended period of time, you start to crank your car, it may take a while to build up fuel pressure to get those injectors to shoot in your engine. Well, Brian, with a town car, we put them MSD coils on there.
Yeah.
May sound a little funny putting MSD coils on a town car, but you know, we did the job right. That engine's across the line of Ford, Mustangs, trucks, whatever it is. And like I said earlier, chain's only strong as its weakest link, so that package was the way to go. Well, now it's time to get out to your garage and make your car run smooth. From our garage to your garage. Thanks for watching Tech Garage.
Production assistance for Tech Garage is provided by Chipola College, located in Marianna, Florida. Founded in 1947, Chipola College has a current enrollment of over 2,000 students. Chipola was recently ranked as one of the top 3 community colleges in the United States.